This is Matthew Cutler-Welsh with Passive House Accelerator, and thanks for tuning in to this special bonus episode of the Passive House podcast, recorded live at PhiusCon 23 here in Houston, Texas. And a big thanks to Zola Windows for their support for this series. And joining me now is Jacob Racusin. Thanks for joining us, Jacob.
It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, you've been enjoying the conference so far?
Oh, yeah, it's been fabulous. Yeah.
And you not technically presenting at the main conference, but you had quite a lot of work to do doing a workshop on the day before, one of the prior workshops. Was it a full day workshop?
It was, yeah. 45 of us spending a day nerding out about carbon accounting on both the material and the operational side of emissions.
So before we jump into that, just tell us a bit about your background, how you got into carbon.
Yeah. So my background initially is as an owner builder. I built a straw bale home for myself and my family starting in 2000. It took a while to build it. I moved from that into the building side of things, working with natural building materials around the Northeast. As we were trying to improve our practices there, that's my sort of first foray into building science, was through improving the performance of our, especially our straw wall assemblies. Through that work, I ended up becoming BPI certified and getting into the building science side of existing buildings. And I got my CHPC back in 2012. And then that just evolved and matured into more and more work on the sort of the design side of things and doing design consulting. And that led towards, I never lost my roots with working with bio-based natural materials. And so the combination of those really activated a strong interest around the carbon emissions of materials. And so that was the trajectory.
What's BPI?
Oh, Building Performance Institute. So that was a certification I went through for building performance in the retrofit space.
Nice. And of course, CPHP, most people will know as Certified Passive House.
Exactly.
And so you've been into sustainability for a while.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
Yeah, well, my early roots were in the realm of food justice. So when I was a younger kid, I was very active with like Food Not Bombs and some of the like local agricultural movement in Vermont and the sort of the food economy in Vermont, and just was very deeply in tune with the impacts both on people and on planet from our food systems. I worked for an organic seed company for a long period of time, and I learned a whole lot around the ecological and social impacts of our food system. And so all of those same values just applied towards the building space once I built my own home and sort of came of age as a tradesperson in that realm. Those values sort of stayed with me, or kind of embedded in why I chose to build with straw for my own home to begin with.
I've got to get onto carbon, but before we do, what's the climate in Vermont?
5A.
What does that mean?
Oh, sorry, that's the agricultural climate. It's really cold. So just, in some, we get down into the negative 20s Fahrenheit with some degree of regularity. Generally have through where I live up in the mountains, pretty guarantee about 3.5 months of frost-free conditions. Summers kind of peak up in the 80s and pretty high humidity. So, compared to Houston, I'd say they're probably pretty mild. Compared to the Northeast, we call them pretty hot, humid summers. And then the winters are long and cold.
How does your straw deal with the humidity?
Brilliantly. The straw has the very same chemical and physical characteristics as wood, and decays and molds within a very similar percentage of moisture content as wood does. So essentially, if you can keep wood dry in an assembly, you can keep straw dry in an assembly.
Transitioning to carbon, I'm assuming straw is a pretty good product or material for embodied carbon, but how did you get interested in carbon, both operational and embodied?
Yeah. Well, so my initial interest in working with straw was from more of a generalized ecological sort of perspective. Like, we had a lot of waste straw in our region from the agricultural sector. It made sense to use that. I was really interested in avoiding the use of petrochemical foams. I was aware of the toxicity of that, both on the human level and the ecological level. So on a more of a qualitative basis, I knew there was some relevance there, and it was the combination of some of the reporting that came out of the IPCC early in the early 2010s, combined with some really good advances of data around like the relative impacts of different materials. That the IPCC warning signals gave the imperative to care, and then the databases was able to actually quantify that and give me something to really organize some strategy and awareness around.
Tell us a little bit about BEAM. What is it, and how did it come about?
Yeah, so the BEAM is the Building Emissions Accounting of Materials. Building Emissions Accounting of Materials. It's released by an organization, Builders for Climate Action, that I work with. It was founded by Chris Magwood, who's a dear friend and longtime colleague. He actually was the originator of the tool. He was starting to do embodied carbon calculations for the work that he did with a school that he used to operate with his partner Jen Fagan called the Endeavor Center. So they developed a big spreadsheet of looking at the emissions profiles of all these different materials they were using. And that became of such great interest to other people. They started to try to format that into a tool to use for others. I sort of got involved with him early on in that to sort of help develop that spreadsheet. And then there was increasing demand and interest for folks, particularly in the residential space, working in small project teams, folks without really large fees, folks whose needs weren't being met by the existing tools that are much more aligned towards larger projects and more like bespoke engineering processes, to have a way of being able to look at this information quickly and inexpensively. Right. And so we sort of took the leap I'll credit Chris and Jen for taking the leap to start Builders for Climate Action and release BEAM as a formal spreadsheet tool. So I've been involved kind of since the beginning then of just helping organize the tool a bit and do a lot of the training. And I've been doing a lot of analysis using the tool as well and working through workflow and how to actually use the tool in a variety of different contexts in the design or construction process.
What's the current market for people doing embodied carbon or life cycle analysis? Is there any requirement for people to do it, or is it mostly just people who are passionate about it and want to learn and know that for themselves?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're definitely starting to see in the code space more inclusions of embodied carbon. Right now, I think they're predominantly voluntary. They're either through a stretch code or as a points option in meeting an energy code. There are some buy clean initiatives on the statewide level that are holding some a little more regulatory imperative for procurement for public projects requiring embodied carbon analysis and reporting. So there's becoming more of a regulatory structure and imperative around it. Right now, it's largely for folks that are looking to take responsibility for the impacts of their work. Yeah.
The other issue that comes up a lot with emerging carbon accounting is around consistency. And there's consistency of the data, where that's coming from, but then also the consistency around assumptions and how you account for what sort of quantity and how's that going across the US on both fronts?
Yeah. It is improving exponentially, I guess is the way I would describe it. And so it's becoming a lot more both transparency and uniformity around the data quality and the tool sets and the accounting methodologies. And the communities that are working on this across the various sort of data and tool spaces are very collaborative and open source and aware of the fact that the coordination and sort of the unification of those data sources and the analysis sort of boundaries and analysis structures needs to be well organized, easy for the market to like understand and enter into, consistent and valid for regulatory structures to rely upon. Yeah. So I would say it's still early in that. All of this is still early policy. We're still kind of early in policy. We're early in the amount of data transparency we have from manufacturers, so on and so forth. But there is a whole lot that's happening to improve that. There's embodied carbon standards moving through ASHRAE, moving through the ResNet program. There's like increasing development of some of the areas like mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that have been sort of absent from a lot of the analysis because of a lack of data. That's really starting to improve, and there's some more robust methodology coming out there too. So I'd say it's all moving very quickly and moving very intentionally around unified, sort of comparable and transferable data and methodologies. And which is really important because there's a broad diversity of markets, from like building typologies going from small residential up to, very large urban infrastructure, as well as, from the consumer trying to understand like the value in a home they may want, up to a regulatory or policy personnel needing to establish some programming with something to point to of legitimacy. And so I think all of those stakeholders are both being engaged and being sort of held as the folks that are really working with the data and working with the tools are really trying to organize and coordinate and hold like a unified movement towards coordination and transparency.
Yeah, it's good to hear some of that consistency coming through. I assume you rely on EPDs a little bit for data?
Yeah, our tool is based off of EPDs because we're explicitly looking at material carbon emissions. And so the other way to describe that boundary is we look at from like the raw material that's being harvested up to the factory gate, if you will. And so the data set we're using for that are EPDs, which is different than life cycle assessment, which is looking at the whole life cycle, and they use a different set of data inputs for that.
What's the next most important step?
There's a few. I'm working right now on a research contract to, as I was mentioning, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing divisions, doing a lot of work to assess the data that's available and the methodologies that are available and bring that down to the residential sector. And so that I'm very excited about because that's, roughly 25% of the embodied emissions of our residents are in heating services. And so being able to capture that is very important. I'm very excited around the work that Building Transparency and the Carbon Leadership Forum has been doing around, again, this convening and organizing the various actors and players in the space. And again, in that beam represents the residential sector well, coordinating with them. That's very exciting. I'm a big champion and proponent of carbon storing building solutions as a necessary strategy for us, not just reducing our emissions, but finding ways we can partner with agriculture and silviculture to store more carbon in the built environment. And the methodology and the data quality and just the conversation around how to think about that is evolving very quickly. That was a very big part of our training on Wednesday. It was a very rich and robust conversation of wood. How do we value the storage? Do we value the storage? The complexities of forest ecology? How does that translate into procurement and structural solutions and finished solutions and insulation solutions? And what's the difference between short cycle and long cycle carbon? All those conversations are really, really important to have so that we can not just do less harm, but do more good with our material choices. But there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot more questions to answer there. And so that's evolving very rapidly. And I'm especially excited about the movement in that space.
Yeah, it's a can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
But it's great to have tools that can help us navigate through that.
Exactly.
Where can people find more about Beam?
buildersforclimateaction.org. You can hop on there, and there's a link to download the tool. It is a free tool. We do ask for donations if folks find it of value. Also offering a series, we do a training series for folks looking to get over the learning curve a little more quickly with using the tool. The first in-person training starts at the very end of November 30th. So it's a great time to hop on, grab the tool, sign up for a training, and literally within the next project, start reducing the climate emissions of your next materials.
Thank you, Jacob, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. And thanks for all the work you're doing at Passive House Accelerator. I love the podcast. I love the work you're doing. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share this with you.